Hey, what's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and this is my first ever live stream. So I am super nervous. I hope this goes well. In this video, a couple of things I want to do. One, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody that has subscribed to the channel thus far. We've recently crossed over 1,000 subscribers, which is absolutely incredible. It is amazing to have made it this far in YouTube. I know I remember when I was at 50 subs and I was trying to get to 100, it seemed like it was a million years away, but here we are. And onward to bigger and better things. If anybody is watching live, which I doubt anyone is, but there might be one or two of you in there. If so, let me know in the chat. Go ahead and say hi. I'm going to go ahead and check real quick to make sure the audio is working. Let me just turn up the volume on this here. Okay. Yep. Audio seems to be working. Perfect. Let me do a couple of things here. Again, this is my first ever live stream, so I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying to make it work as best I can. There we go. All right, cool. So what I wanted to do here, of course, is to do a little Q&A for those of you that have been following along now that we're at 1,000 subscribers. In addition to that, in this video, you are going to see me record live a very important video that I've been wanting to do for a little while now, and that is a video breaking down every single year that I have been on this planet Earth and talking about my favorite movies from each of those years. For those that are unaware, I am probably a bit older than you may have guessed. I am 36 years old, which means I was born in 1987. So we're going to go all the way back to 1987 until 2022. We're not going to include 2023 because we're still in the middle of that year, but I'm going to give you my favorite movie from each year. Also, a few people sent me some questions, so I'm going to answer those here in the chat, or not in the chat, but in the live stream. And then if you have any questions, drop them in the live chat and I'll try to answer them as well in between years. If that all makes sense, let's get going here. The first question, let me pull it up real quick, is from a longtime listener. It is Storm Shadow. So shout out to Storm Shadow. Thank you so much for subscribing and being subscribed for so long. Storm Shadow asks a very important question. Why is the name ImpressiveTony? That's actually a funny story. I don't think I'm particularly impressive, to be honest, but that name goes back to 2008 when I was hanging out with some friends in like an online chat thing. And at the time, the first Iron Man movie came out. And there's a line in the movie where Obadiah Stane is talking to Tony Stark and he just says impressive, but he says it in like a really, I guess, funny way, or at least a way that was funny to a bunch of dudes on the internet at the time. And so one of my friends just started saying ImpressiveTony. And so I changed my username to ImpressiveTony and it has been that ever since. Pretty simple, nothing crazy. Again, I don't think I'm particularly impressive. In fact, I would say the opposite, although my therapist would probably tell me to not say that. So yeah. Another question that came in is from Anaisa Guerrero, who actually has a similar last name to me. I wonder if any of you know my last name. Either way, her question is, when did I start viewing movies and what made me create a YouTube channel? I mean, when did I start viewing movies? Of course, I've been watching movies my entire life. When did I start viewing movies critically though? Like, when did I watch a movie for the first time and think about more than just the entertainment value that you get from watching a movie? I would say it was around 2002. So in 2002, I would have been 13, 14 years old. And I believe that was when X-Men 2 came out. It was either 2002 or 2003, now that I think about it. And I bought the DVD box set of X-Men 1 and 2. And I also had a couple other movies, but that was like the main one. And I poured over all of the special features in that box set. I would watch them over and over again. The director commentaries, the behind the scenes features. They had a bunch of like making of things that would show them on set and what they were doing on set and how they were setting up the shots and everything. And after watching that dozens of times, I think it was safe to say I was pretty obsessed with movies and the way that they're made. But that was genuinely the trigger. That was the thing that really kicked off my movie obsession, and I have been loving them ever since. Thank you, Anaisa, for the question. I appreciate that. The third question that we have here, which was posted before the video went live, comes from The Tyrant. And they said, what is your favorite genre to review and why? That is a difficult question. I honestly like all kinds of movies. I think, and what we'll find out here as I go through the different years that I've been alive and my favorite movies from those years, I have pretty basic tastes, I think. You know, I enjoy all kinds of movies. I enjoy like deep philosophical movies. You know, one of my favorite movies of all time is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a very cerebral film. Also, you know, 12 Angry Men is another big one. That's a great movie. But as far as the genre that I just enjoy, it's going to be action, sci-fi, comic book movies, even though they've gotten a little long in the tooth at this point. I think a lot of the comic book movies have become really, really formulaic. I'm just a big fan of kind of all the stereotypical dude movies that you would think of. So that is definitely, if I were to say one genre though, I'm gonna go sci-fi. I'll go sci-fi because I think some of my favorite movies are comic book movies, but as far as reviewing them, they're all pretty much the same, more or less, whereas sci-fi can go off on all different kinds of tangents. You can have a sci-fi horror film, although I guess you could do the same with comic books. They just haven't really done it. But yeah, I'll say just broadly, sci-fi. So those are the questions that we have currently before the stream started. So if anybody has any other questions, let me know in the chat. I'll keep that pulled up on my screen over here. But as we move along, let's just get into some of my favorite movies of all time. Again, this is kind of me recording this, so you're going to get a behind the scenes view of how I record my videos, which is not as smooth as you see when I post the final product online. There's a lot of stumbling and bumbling and pausing and going back and trying sentences over again, so you'll have to excuse me for that. Okay, first things first. Of course, I was born in 1987. It was a cold winter night. Actually, I don't know yeah, it was in winter, but I don't know if it was very cold. So in 1987, there were a number of great movies that came out that year. But the one that is my favorite is a movie called, and I'm sure you know it, Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon is not in and of itself what I would consider a great film critically. But again, these are my favorites. These are the movies that either I want to go back and watch time and time again, or ones that I have really fond memories of. And for me, Lethal Weapon was the only movie, the only rated R movie that my mom owned on VHS growing up. So I saw it probably earlier than I should have and more times than I should have as a kid. So for those that are unfamiliar, Lethal Weapon stars Mel Gibson, Danny Glover. It was directed by Shane Black. Shane Black has done a bunch of other movies. He was in Predator, oddly enough, which I think came out the same year as Lethal Weapon, 1987. And he's directed a bunch of other really great movies, some that I really enjoy. And it's a buddy cop drama comedy that it just holds a special place in my heart. You know, in and of itself, if you look at it as a film, it's nothing really special. The actors, the main two actors, are very likable. But aside from that, it's just a kind of generic buddy cop movie. But again, these are my favorite films. It holds a special place in my heart. I've seen it a million times growing up, and that's going to be my pick for 1987. Of course, if your picks differ from my own, definitely let me know in the comments, either in the live chat or after the video is posted. Let me know whatever you think, what your picks are for each particular year. I would love to hear it. Oh, also, I should say this whole concept of picking a movie from each year, I got from who I call the big homie, which is Films at Home. It's a YouTube channel that he has over 100,000 subscribers, and he's really helped me a lot along the way. He's kind of been a mentor to me, and he did a video on this. He got the concept from another person who I can't remember now off the top of my head, but shout out to him. If you're into films, specifically Blu-rays, 4K, all that stuff, make sure you check out his channel. And if you're seeing me, you've probably already heard of him. So shout out to Films at Home. All right. And with that, we will move on to 1988. So in 1988, one-year-old me, again, a number of great movies came out that year. You have Beetlejuice, that's really popular with a lot of people. I didn't really like Beetlejuice as a kid. It kind of freaked me out. I mean, I'm sure it freaked out a lot of kids that were watching it at that time. Although I guess I didn't really watch it in 88 because I would have been 1 year old. 1 year old. And so I didn't watch it until much later. But my pick for 1988 is a holiday classic. Some say the greatest Christmas movie of all time, and that is Die Hard. That's right. John McClane, Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis, the legendary Alan Rickman, Reginald Vell Johnson, aka Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince, was in that movie. This one was directed by John McTiernan, who is a legend from doing a lot of action movies in the 80s and 90s. So this is a film that I think has stood the test of time. It's a classic. There's been a number of sequels that have come out after it, none of which I feel really hold up to the original. But Die Hard, one of my favorite movies of all time. Something I'm noticing though, 1987, 1988, I watched a lot of movies that I probably shouldn't have been watching as a little kid. You have Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, which are both definitely not for children, but these are movies that I grew up with. So I don't know what that means. I'm sure there's some things to explore there in my psyche about why, what happens to a kid when he watches these kind of movies. But Die Hard is my pick for 1988. All right, coming up next for 1989, there is only one right choice for 1989. It's, of course, one of the most iconic and influential comic book movies of all time, and that is Batman 89. Something you're going to notice from my list here is, and I want to make this very, very clear, and I've mentioned it before, these are not necessarily the most critically acclaimed movies of all time. These are not necessarily what I would even say are, quote, the best movies of the year. These are my favorites. So for me, there are definitely going to be a lot of comic book movies in this list. There's going to be a lot of action, sci-fi, all that good stuff. Please don't judge me. But yes, Batman 89 is, I think it's one of, if not the best Batman movie of all time. But I also believe if you don't think that, that's fine. What you can't argue with, though, is that it is one of, if not the most influential comic book movies of all time. You know, a lot of people talk about the X-Men movies that came out in the early 2000s as kind of changing the game when it comes to comic book movies, but really Batman did it first in the 80s. And of course, it kind of fell off with the later Batman movies, you know, when you had George Clooney playing Batman and all of that. But Batman 89, I think, was a monumental film. It had a massive impact on how we viewed what was possible with taking comic books into live action cinema, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. It's directed by Tim Burton, who oddly enough is not a director that I'm a massive fan of. In fact, for quite a while I just straight up didn't really like his style. He has a very specific style, and I remember as a kid just feeling kind of like he was trying too hard. But as I've gotten older, I think I've come to appreciate his style, and especially with Batman 89, it works so perfectly with the world and the characters that he set up. So Batman 89, one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite comic book movies, and most certainly my favorite movie from 89. All right, coming up next, we move into the 90s, which is, I think, probably the greatest decade for film. I don't know, it's hard to say. I know some people have a really soft spot for the 80s, but for me, the 90s were incredible. And as a kid, my favorite movie of 1990 is what I think is also one of, just in general, every kid's favorite movie in the early 90s, and that is Home Alone. Of course, starring Macaulay Culkin. You have Joe Pesci playing one of the wet bandits, and who would later become known as the Sticky Bandits in Home Alone 2. Daniel Stern played the other. It's written by John Hughes, oddly enough, but directed by Chris Columbus, who would also go on to direct, I think, the first 2 Harry Potter movies. So this is a 90s kid staple. The Home Alone movies, both of them, but especially the first movie. Although, looking back on it, this movie is very, very violent. There are a lot of things that Kevin McAllister does in this movie that, I mean, he in real life would have straight up murdered those 2 dudes. Well, in fact, some of the things he did would have killed them, but I think they would have found a way around it if they were real adults in the real world. So do not try this at home. If you're a little kid and you get left by your family for the holiday, do not try to put micro machines on the stairs in an attempt to thwart people that are trying to break into your house. Instead, just run away. Call the cops. Home Alone is a movie that I had seen over and over and over again as a kid, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. It's one of those movies that if it's ever on, or if anybody ever wants to watch it, I'm always down. And that's really gonna be for a lot of the movies on this list. These movies are the kind of movies that if it's on, I'm watching. And that's basically how I determine whether or not it's one of my favorites. Oh God, this is gonna be so difficult. I'm so old. There are so many movies on this list. This is gonna take forever. I didn't think this through. All right, coming up next in 1991, of course, my favorite movie for 1991 is one of, if not the greatest action movie of certainly of the 90s, possibly of all time, and that is the 1991 Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Terminator 2, of course, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton looking absolutely jacked. You have Edward Furlong, Robert Patrick playing the T-1000. It's both written and directed by James Cameron, who cannot miss. James Cameron hasn't written and directed a ton of movies, but every single movie he does knocks it out of the park and makes a ton of money and is incredibly well received. Without a doubt, Terminator 2, it couldn't fail. So of course, the first Terminator, I would say it's much more of a horror movie, sci-fi horror. And with Terminator 2, you get way more into the action side of things. It's kind of a 90s iconic film. There's like so many things, whether it's at the mall, at the arcade, all the things that people are wearing, the way they're speaking, it's kind of like a time capsule for that period. And it really does a wonderful job. The action sequences are incredible. The ending with Arnold Schwarzenegger getting dunked into, spoilers for Terminator 2, but Arnold Schwarzenegger getting dumped into a vat of basically molten lava. It is an iconic film and one of the greats of the 90s. All right, coming up next at 1992 is my favorite Disney animated movie of all time, and that is Aladdin. Of course, there are a ton of really great Disney movies, but this one hit me at just the right time. Being a young boy, specifically a young brown boy, and then getting a movie with the star being a young brown kid who was kind of riff-raff, right? Riff-raff, street rat, you know the song. And it just really stuck with me as a kid. It was a movie that I enjoyed. It was a lot of fun. You had Robin Williams playing the genie, who was iconic in that role. The live action movie with Will Smith was doomed to fail from the start because there's no way that you can even come close to the comedic genius of Robin Williams in that role. Absolutely love Aladdin. Again, my favorite Disney movie of all time. One of, if not my favorite animated movie, period, of all time. All right, in 1993, this was a tough one. There are a ton of really good movies that came out in 1993. And as we get to 1994, 1995, there are also some really great movies from those years. But for me, 1993 is going to be Jurassic Park. Of course. I mean, Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg. This movie has had so many sequels that have come out, and none of them have really come close to the original, and yet they still keep pumping them out because they're hoping to strike that gold yet again. Of course, they've all made money, so maybe that's also why they're putting them out. But the original Jurassic Park is an incredible movie. Again, as a kid in the 90s, it scared you, it excited you, it gave you everything you wanted. Of course, all little kids are obsessed with dinosaurs, and this takes that to a very frightening direction, but also at the end of it all, just a fun film. There are, of course, some very violent moments, people getting eaten by dinosaurs, arms getting ripped off, all that stuff. But as a kid, I really enjoyed it. It was a really good movie. Another great movie that came out in 1993, and this is just me trolling, is a film called Surf Ninjas. I definitely recommend you check that out if you get the chance. Surf Ninjas, not a good movie by any means, but a movie I love. So there's your little tip there. Check that movie out if you can find it. All right, coming in at 1994, my favorite movie from that year is also, I think, my favorite comedy of all time, and that is Jim Carrey's Dumb and Dumber. Dumb and Dumber is a movie I've seen a million times. It's a movie I can quote. It's a movie that if I was in a situation where somebody held a gun to my head and said, you have to recite a movie from front to back, or that's it for you, it would be Dumb and Dumber. I absolutely love this movie. It's, of course, the Farrelly brothers who directed it. Written, I believe they also wrote the movie. It's got Jim Carrey, Jeff Daniels. It's a comedy classic. Also, 93, 94 was a wild time for Jim Carrey. I think specifically 94, he did Dumb and Dumber. He did Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. And there was a third movie I can't remember off the top of my head, but he had a crazy year in 94. But for me, Dumb and Dumber is my favorite comedy. It's of course, one of my favorite movies of all time, so it had to be my pick for the year. Okay, coming up next in 1995 this was also a difficult one because there are so many great movies, but as I was scrolling through the list of movies that came out in 1995, there was one that I passed that I just had to stop on, and I couldn't scroll any further because this was the choice, and it was so clear to me, and that is Kevin Smith's Mallrats. Now, I know Mallrats was not really well received when it first came out, didn't make a lot of money in theaters, didn't get a lot of really positive reviews, but it really found its footing later on in the home video market. And for me, this is a movie that I would then discover later on. I think it was streaming on TV. Streaming. I say streaming. Streaming didn't exist back then. It was just on TV. And I remember watching it, I think late at night on, I don't remember what channel it was. It might have been like MTV or something like that. This is, again, a time capsule of that time. You know, we've talked about Terminator 2 being a time capsule as well. This is absolutely a time capsule of the mid-90s. The whole mall culture. The story itself is kind of, nonsense. It's nothing really special or impactful, but it's just a feel-good movie. And again, if we're ranking these based on my favorites, this is absolutely one of them. It's a movie that I will go back and watch time and time again. It's one of my favorite Kevin Smith movies, probably not my absolute favorite, but I think it's the most rewatchable without a doubt. Oh, this is fun. Okay. Coming in at 1996? No. Coming out in 1996, my favorite movie of that year is, and it's really my favorite movie of this whole franchise. So it is the first Mission Impossible. Now, if you think about Mission Impossible now, you're probably thinking about all of these crazy over-the-top stunts that Tom Cruise pulls off. It's always about, what is the most wild thing he could possibly do, jumping out of a plane, jumping from the stratosphere, jumping the Grand Canyon. Like, he's doing all these ridiculous stunts. But the original Mission Impossible was not that kind of a movie. The original Mission Impossible was a straight-up spy thriller. It was slower paced. It was, all about trying to figure out who was, doing what, who the real bad guy was, what was going on behind the scenes. And I love that movie. It is absolutely my favorite Mission Impossible movie without a doubt. It's an entirely different energy, a different vibe, if you will, than all the rest of the movies in the series. And it's a movie that, again, I can go back and watch time and time again. You have, of course, Tom Cruise. You've got Emilio Estevez in the movie for, a short period of time, a very short period of time. Rest in peace, Emilio. You also have John Voight, who I think, is that Angelina Jolie's dad? Is that right? I don't remember, but he's in it. Ving Rhames. It's directed by Brian De Palma. It's a great movie. absolutely, if you haven't seen the original Mission Impossible, check it out. If you think that Mission Impossible is what these most recent movies have been, it's really not. If you go back to the first movie, it is entirely different, and I definitely recommend you check it out. My pick for 1997 coming up next is a movie that, again, I've seen a million times. It's a sci-fi movie. It's an action movie. It's a comedy movie. It's a romance movie. It is The Fifth Element. So The Fifth Element, of course, you have Bruce Willis, Mila Jovovich, Gary Oldman is in this, playing a great role. Chris Tucker is hilarious in this movie. It's written and directed by Luc Besson, who also did The Professional and a few other movies. He's a fantastic writer-director. And it's just in addition to being really, really funny, thanks to Chris Tucker, in addition to having awesome action sequences and Mila Jovovich just totally kicking butt throughout the movie, in addition to having a lot of heart, it's also just kind of an artistically profound film, I guess you could say. I can't remember the inspiration. There's a specific artist, I think it's a French artist, that was the inspiration for the style of the film. And you can totally see that it has its own very specific style. And I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. Even, how many years later, 25 years later or so, it still looks absolutely amazing. It's so much fun to watch. And I've owned it on DVD. I've owned it on Blu-ray, and now I own it on 4K, and I will buy this in whatever format it comes out in for the rest of my life because it's just a wonderful movie. And yeah, I would say I absolutely recommend you check it out, but I feel like everybody's already seen The Fifth Element, so I'm sure you agree. If you don't agree, let me know. That's what I would love to hear. If some of the movies on my list are movies that you hate, let me know why, because I would love to hear why somebody's opinion would be so different, from my own. Of course, we all have different opinions, but if you, for example, hate The Fifth Element, let me know why, because I'd love to hear it. What I'm learning here is that the 90s are without a doubt my favorite decade for movies because every single year is a banger. So 1998 is another movie that I can probably quote from beginning to end, and it drives my girlfriend crazy because she can't stand that I love this movie as much as I do. But that is the Jackie Chan and, speaking of, Chris Tucker movie, Rush Hour. That's right. The first Rush Hour is so much fun. It's directed by Brett Ratner, and it's an interesting movie in that some of the jokes, I don't know if they would really fly today. It's really a product of its time because a lot of the jokes are about, Chris Tucker is this black cop from LA and Jackie Chan is a Chinese detective from, he's from China. Well, he's from specifically, I forget where he's from. He's from Hong Kong, I think, is what they say in the movie. And so you have a lot of it just being these kind of racially and socially, like, their differences, and a lot of the humor is in those kind of jokes, but it's so much fun. Chris Tucker, again, is hilarious, as he always is. Jackie Chan pulls off some incredible stunts. It's really funny because this is a lot of people's first introduction to Jackie Chan, and I think for me, the first time I saw him was in a movie called Rumble in the Bronx, which might have been his first American film, I think, now that I think about it. But this movie kind of put him on the map in America and let everybody know what kind of crazy stuff he was doing. So Rush Hour is a fantastic movie. It's so funny. The action's great. The car that Chris Tucker drives was my favorite car as a kid. I believe it was a 1982 Corvette Stingray convertible. Love that car to this day. Absolutely amazing. And yeah, it drives my girlfriend crazy how much I love this movie and how I quote it. Every time it comes on, I'll just start reciting every single line from the movie. Oh God, my voice, she's going. I should have thought this through. I should have had like tea or something ready. Coming up next to finish off the 90s, probably the best decade for movies, is the 1999 movie, The Matrix. Of course, it's The Matrix. I couldn't pick anything else, even if I wanted to. The Matrix is such a monumental, game-changing movie that has, it's, I remember hearing the sign of greatness. And, I don't know if this necessarily applies to The Matrix now that I think about it, but I'll say it anyway. The sign of greatness is when something about like when no one before you or nothing before you has, dang it, now I'm screwing up the quote. Hold on, let me look it up. Please hold. I'm Googling. This is what happens when you hang out live. Okay, here we go. The mark of greatness is when everything before you is obsolete and everything after you bears your mark. Now, I don't know if everything before the first Matrix is obsolete, and I would argue that The Matrix bears the mark of some other movies that came before it, but certainly it was a game changer in that everything that came after The Matrix has, you know, in those genres bears the mark of The Matrix without a doubt. Now, you can say The Matrix is the child of Ghost in the Shell or of Blade Runner or of so many other movies and comics and especially anime, big time with anime, or with even Hong Kong movies. A lot of the martial arts, the wire work that they did in The Matrix comes straight from Hong Kong. So you could say that it's I don't know the word for it, derivative of all of those things. But it was the first time, you know, even if you say that, you can't deny that it was the first time that all of those concepts were brought together in a big way for the major Western audience. So The Matrix, I think, will always be one of the biggest game changer movies, and everything since it has bared its mark. And unfortunately, it's, in my opinion, the only good Matrix movie was the first one. The rest have been just, I mean, I don't want to say they're all bad, but they're certainly nowhere near as good as the original. I'll say that. The Animatrix is kind of cool. If you haven't seen that, check out the Animatrix. It's a series of several shorts that are made by famous anime directors, and so each one is in its own unique style, and they're like little side stories about the world of the Matrix. So definitely check that out if you get the chance. But the original Matrix, an absolutely monumental film, written and directed by the Wachowskis, and nothing has, I think, topped it since it came out in the world of sci-fi, if I'm being honest. You know, you have other great sci-fi movies, but nothing will ever take the place of The Matrix. So now we are going to get into the 2000s, and this is where you're going to start to see that I am really just a child. A lot of my picks, again, these are my favorite movies. They're not the ones that I think are necessarily the best critically, but they're just the ones that I love, the ones that I will go back and watch time and time again, or the ones that have had the most impact on me, have brought me the most joy in my life. And for the year 2000, it could not be any other film but the original X-Men. And this movie, again, as I mentioned before when I talked about Batman 89, a lot of people say the original X-Men kind of changed the game for comic book movies, and it did in a lot of ways, even though I would argue that Batman 89 kind of kicked that off first. And really, even the original Superman movies from back in the day, probably, you know, from the 70s. Was it the 70s? I'm terrible with remembering these kind of things, but those really kickstarted the whole comic book genre in film. But what the X-Men did, I think, is they grounded the comic book world in reality. The opening of the first X-Men movie, which takes place during Nazi Germany in a concentration camp, is something that we had never seen before. And the fact that they were able to take these fantastic elements of superpowered people and make them feel real, make them feel like real people that had real experiences. You know, you can credit it to Stan Lee for the way that he, you know, when he created the X-Men in the comic books, a lot of it was an allegory for the civil rights movement at the time, right? So you have this segment of humans who are, you know, different in certain ways physically from the rest. And because of that, they are treated very poorly. They're, you know, of course, in the real world with the civil rights movement, there was all kinds of issues with non-white people and how they were treated by, I mean, really everyone, including the government at the time. And in the X-Men, Stan Lee has kind of connected that with these mutants, these people that are just as human as anybody else, and if not better in a lot of ways, are being treated so poorly simply because of something they can't control, their own biology, right? And so I like that they tie that in with reality. And with this movie, directed by Bryan Singer, who has since, unfortunately, kind of become a bit of a questionable person, to say the least. I think he did a wonderful job with this movie. I think everybody in it was great. Patrick Stewart was born to play Charles Xavier. If you look at Charles Xavier from the comic books, Professor X, it's Patrick Stewart. Like, that is Patrick Stewart. Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine was massively controversial at the time because Wolverine is historically a 5'2", like bulky dude, and then Hugh Jackman is like 6'4" or something like that, and he was a dancer prior to starring as Wolverine, so there was a big deal with that. But he's since gone on to, I mean, be inextricably linked to that character of Wolverine. I can't imagine anybody else playing him at this point, which is great. Ian McKellen playing Magneto was fantastic. You have so many other actors and actresses that have gone on to do, you know, such great things. James Marsden kind of, you know, hit it big on that movie playing Cyclops, and now he's been in a ton of things. And so many other people that I can't even name now. Rebecca Romaine Stamos, Ray Park, Halle Berry, Anna Paquin was in there as Storm. No, I'm sorry, as Rogue, and she's gone on to be in a ton of things since then. So a great movie. Unfortunately, after the second X-Men movie, it kind of went into a bit of a slump, and there's been kind of hit and miss with, you know, some good movies, some really bad ones. But the first one, absolutely legendary and really changed the game in a big way. I think I talked way too much there about X-Men. I'm so sorry. This next year, 2001, this one is going to get me so much heat. I already know it, but I have to be honest. If we're talking about my favorite movies, in 2001, there was a movie that came out that, now in 2001, you have to think I'm 13, 14 years old. Yeah, about 14. And a movie came out that blew my mind as a 14-year-old boy. And I could not wait for another 2 years. I could not wait for 2003 because I knew in 2003 I was going to turn 16 and I was going to get my driver's license and I was going to get a crappy car and I was going to try to race that crappy car. So my pick for 2001 is, God, I'm so ashamed of this, the first Fast and the Furious. Yep, it's true. I'm sorry. I know there are so many better movies that came out in 2001, but I can't deny the fact that I loved, and I still love, the original Fast and the Furious. I know it's a Point Break remake, basically. I know the acting is pretty subpar. I know, oh my God, Ja Rule is in the movie for whatever reason. But I love that movie so much. I will watch that movie over and over again for the rest of my life. And it just really stuck with me as a teenager. And I think it did for most teenagers at that time, you know, probably especially teenage boys in 2001. But yes, I love the first Fast and the Furious. I love quite a few of them. The most recent ones, not so much. I actually just reviewed Fast 10. So if you want to check that out, it's on my channel, my review of Fast 10. Didn't love that, I would say, anywhere near as much as the original, that's for sure. But 2001, I'm sorry to all of the great movies that came out in 2001, but I have to go with the Fast and the Furious. Oh boy. Don't hate me. Okay, next up, 2002. Now this is another movie that reminded me a bit of the first Mission Impossible. I guess it's probably a genre that I really like. I like these kind of spy thriller with a little bit of action mixed in with it. 2002 is The Bourne Identity. That was my favorite movie of that year. I love the first Bourne movie. Again, it's a lot like the first Mission Impossible, except for definitely some more action than the Mission Impossible movies. It's directed by Doug Liman, who has gone on to do a ton of really great movies. You have Matt Damon, of course, Brian Cox, who is a legendary actor, who was also in X-Men, in fact, oddly enough. Julia Stiles, who is, you know, Julia Stiles. Here's a fun thing. If you ever go to Universal Studios in Florida, they have a Bourne Identity ride. And it's one of those like ride/shows where you have a bunch of stunt performers and everything. And Julia Stiles did some like a video package for the ride. So it's her talking on screen like, you know, hello everyone, we need you to help us find Jason Bourne, and here we go. And it's that whole thing. It is the most phoned in performance I have ever seen in my entire life. It literally looks like they were holding her hostage and gave her a script and we're just like, you have to read this script or we're going to kill your dog. Like, that's what it looks like. She did not want to be there. You can absolutely tell. So if you get a chance, go on that ride at Universal Studios, if for nothing else, just to laugh at that. But yes. Okay. So the first Bourne movie, Bourne Identity, is, you know, it also reminds me of The Transporter in a way. It's that kind of European, you know, I don't know how to describe it. There's like an allure to those kind of films. I think maybe because I grew up in America, and especially in the early 2000s was not traveling to Europe at all, didn't know much about it. And so you kind of see like what's going on or what it looks like, what it feels like to be on the streets of European countries. And I guess that's probably part of why I really like The Bourne Identity or even The Transporter now that we're talking about it. But aside from that, the story itself is really interesting. Matt Damon, I know some people aren't big Matt Damon fans, but I think he's fantastic, especially in this role at this time. The action sequences are really great, although it did kind of birth the shaky cam era of action movies, which I can't stand. But in this movie, at the time that this came out, it was, something new and different that we hadn't seen before. And I think it was done quite well in this movie. The shaky cam action sequences, they just kind of went overboard with it in the later films. But yes, 2002, The Bourne Identity, love that movie. All right, coming up next for 2003, this was a really difficult year for me to pick. There are two movies really that were so monumental for me in 2003. One was a movie we kind of touched on before, which is X-Men 2, which is, I think, probably still the best X-Men movie, and certainly at the time was massive for me. But the more I thought about this, the more I just realized that even though I love X-Men 2, there's another movie that I loved just as much at the time and will continue to watch and show everyone I can to this day. And that is The Last Samurai. Yes, The Last Samurai. I know it's another one of the white savior films where it's like, Tom Cruise, a white guy from America goes and saves a native population, or at least attempts to in this movie. And I get that. But in 2003, I'm 15, 16 years old. I am head over heels for Japanese culture at the time. And I still love Japanese culture. I've been to Japan since, and it's amazing. But at the time I was, really die hard into like anime and learning about samurais and reading the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi and all that stuff. And so to get this movie, which delves into a lot of Japanese history, although it's certainly not entirely accurate, they definitely take a lot of their own kind of, there's a lot of leeway with the way that they tell this story, and it's not necessarily the most accurate, but still at the time, it's so cool as a kid to see this all brought to film in a major Hollywood production, right? You've seen a lot of like samurai films from back in the day that were lower budget, primarily made in Japan for a Japanese audience in Japanese language, but to have a Tom Cruise led samurai flick that looks absolutely incredible visually. I mean, this was massive for me at the time. And I still think it's a really good movie. You have Ken Watanabe, who is one of my favorite actors and certainly one of my favorite Japanese actors. Also, Hiroyuki Sanada, who was a great Japanese actor and also a great swordsman, oddly enough. So a lot of the stuff in the movie, he did his own kind of sword play in there. It's directed by Edward Zwick, who I'm not super familiar with. I don't know if he's done a whole lot as far as directing outside of that, but I'd have to look that up, to be honest. I'm sure he's done a ton of stuff. I just haven't really heard of a lot of his work. But yes, The Last Samurai, love that movie, loved it as a kid, still love it to this day. And I think it's a fantastic movie. So it's got to be my pick for 2003. All right, next up for 2004, we have not mentioned a particular franchise just yet that has had a number of movies come out, and that is the Harry Potter franchise. But in 2004, what I think is the best Harry Potter movie came out, and that is The Prisoner of Azkaban. Totally love this movie. Of course, it stars all of the usual people from Harry Potter: Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint. You also have Gary Oldman, of course, who's in this movie, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who has gone on to do some incredible movies. So the fact that they had him for a Harry Potter movie is wild, because he has gone on to do so much more really serious film, and his style, his skill as a director really comes across in this movie. I think it's the best Harry Potter movie. I think it is a very adult film in a lot of ways. With the Harry Potter movies, especially for myself. So I was basically the age of Harry Potter as the books were coming out. And it's funny because my girlfriend was basically the age of Harry Potter as the movies were coming out. So we both have kind of a little bit of a different perspective. But I think with the movies and with the books even, you're growing with those characters as they come out and as you're watching these movies and reading these books. And in 2004, or at the time when the books came out, I forget what year that was for me. But as you're getting to that age, and then you get to a story like The Prisoner of Azkaban, and the weight and the seriousness of this movie, I feel like it's a movie that a lot of kids grew up like, and I don't say grew up as in like, oh, as you're growing up, you're watching this. No, I mean like that moment is when a lot of kids were like, oh, there are some real consequences in life. Like it really opened up the eyes to a lot of like younger people, I think. And I thought it was expertly done. So totally love The Prisoner of Azkaban. I had to put at least one Harry Potter movie on this list because I love the franchise so much, and I've seen those movies a million times. But I think this is the one to have on the list. It's absolutely the best. All right, next up, coming in, I keep saying that. Why do I keep, you know what it is? It's because I've done so many ranking videos. So I'm like, coming in at number 7. No. Next up for 2005 is yet another comic book movie. Guys, there's going to be a lot of these on the list, and I'm sorry, but it's just what it is. I'm a big comic book fan. I have been my entire life. In fact, fun little story. I remember the first comic book I ever read was a Wolverine comic book, and I couldn't remember what it was. And I had to hunt it down, or I didn't have to, but I chose to hunt it down as an adult. And I was just Googling like, okay, the one where Wolverine fights Nick Fury and there's like a guy who gets stuck on a fence. Like, I'm like trying to figure out what this comic book is. And I finally found it. I have it now on my bookshelf out in the living room. But I've been into comic books pretty much my entire life. 1992, 1993, I had the Marvel collectible trading cards for the entire series of them for both years. So there's gonna be a lot of comic book movies on my list is what I'm trying to say. So don't at me. Okay. 2005, of course, is Batman Begins. Now, I know a lot of people, their favorite movie in the Dark Knight trilogy is, of course, The Dark Knight. And I get that. The Dark Knight is a great movie for the most part. I think the ending of The Dark Knight falls apart, if I'm being honest. But the first movie in that trilogy, Batman Begins, I mean, it's almost flawless. I personally, it's my favorite in the trilogy. I think it's a wonderful movie. Also has Ken Watanabe yet again. He's in The Last Samurai and also in Batman Begins. There you go. But yes, the Batman Begins is, I mean, one of my favorite Batman movies. It's right up there with Batman 89, if I'm being honest. And, you know, you have to also think about the time, right? So at the time we had gotten a few Batman movies in the 90s, and it fell off hard with those last couple Batman movies, with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Those movies were so terrible, it almost killed the franchise. And then 2005, Christopher Nolan, who had previously done some really, really good movies, they give him the rights to do a Batman movie. And our expectations were low. They were, if you remember at the time, our expectations were very low, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park. This movie is incredible. To this day, love this movie. It's just so well done. And I'm a Christopher Nolan fan, but I don't think that he is, you know, the best thing since sliced bread. I'm a little critical of him from time to time. He tends to do things in movies that are he reaches for things, and in reaching for those things, neglects some of the important pieces along the way. I don't know if that makes sense. I think about a movie like Memento, where it's like, wow, what an interesting concept. But then if you actually examine the movie, it kind of falls apart a little bit. And I think with Batman Begins, he did such a wonderful job with it. I don't know of any weak links in that movie. There's no parts of that movie that I'm like, that didn't really work out. I think it's pretty much perfectly done. All right, next up, 2006. This is another kind of spy thriller-ish type movie, and that is the only 007 movie that I've had in this list thus far, Casino Royale. This is the first James Bond movie starring Daniel Craig. You also have Eva Green, the Dame Judi Dench, Jeffrey Wright, Mads Mikkelsen. It's directed by Martin Campbell. This is, I think, probably the best James Bond movie. I haven't seen them all, to be fair, right? I've seen all of Daniel Craig's. I've seen a lot of Pierce Brosnan's. I've seen Sean Connery's. I haven't seen much outside of that, though. But for me, this movie was amazing. Right from the opening sequence of the whole parkour free running sequence where James Bond is chasing this guy up scaffolding. It's an amazing movie. You get to see kind of the origin of James Bond, or as he becomes 007, which is really cool. I don't know if that's anything that we had seen up until this point in any of the 007 movies. Also, it's really dark. Some really dark things happen in this movie. So you get a little bit of everything. You've got your action, you've got your comedy, you've got your romance, you've got a lot of weight to the movie. It's a fantastic film. Definitely my favorite from 2006. And I think safe to say my favorite 007 movie, at least so far. Again, I'd have to go back and watch some of the others that I missed along the way. All right, next up on the list for 2007 is a movie that I kind of bounced around on. I wasn't sure which one I wanted to go with here, but that is the remake of 3:10 to Yuma. Now, this is a movie that, I saw for the first time a few years back. I grew up not really liking Western movies at all. My grandfather was a massive Western fan, and I spent a lot of time with him as a kid, and he would watch the cheesiest Western movies ever put to film. And I just did not like it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand why he was so into this genre. And so I kind of put it off for a long time. Then I watched a couple of movies, Unforgiven for one, which is an incredible film, and 3:10 to Yuma, which really kind of showed me that the Western genre can be so much more than what I expected. And with 3:10 to Yuma, you have Russell Crowe and Christian Bale, also in Batman Begins. There's some connections here. You also have Peter Fonda, who is fantastic in this movie. Alan Tudyk, who I love. He's always very funny. Directed by James Mangold, who has gone on to become just a really, really good director. The movie is about a rancher played by Christian Bale who has been injured in a war. He lost one of his legs, and he is basically recruited to help transport Russell Crowe's character, who Russell Crowe is a kind of Billy the Kid style bad guy. And Christian Bale volunteers to help transport him to a nearby town to put him on a train to send him to prison. And it's a really cool exploration into what does it mean to be good and what does it mean to be evil. And you kind of learn along the way that there isn't really like a pure good or evil, right? There are shades of gray in every person. And so even somebody who is a bad guy, like Russell Crowe's character, has some good in him. And somebody like Christian Bale's character, who you would think is a good guy, he's a war hero, he's a dad, he's a good Christian man, like he's got some villainous tendencies too. So it's a really cool exploration into humans and humanity and how we are and good versus evil and all of that. So love this movie. One of my favorite Westerns, flat out. I think I would probably put Unforgiven above it, but this is right there. Absolutely. All right. Coming in 2008, my favorite film. We go back into the world of comic books yet again with the first Iron Man movie. Now, this movie, as with a lot of the other comic book movies on my list, was another game changer. This began the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And at the time, you have Robert Downey Jr., who was kind of dead to Hollywood. He had made a lot of personal mistakes in his life at this point, and this was really the fact that he got this movie was a shock to a lot of people. But what also I think shocked a lot of people was how well he did in this movie, and the fact that now when you think about Iron Man, you think about Robert Downey Jr. This is one of those characters that you really can't imagine anybody else playing him. And I think the first Iron Man movie is a fantastic film. It does what the first X-Men movie did, which is it ties this fantastic world to reality. And it makes us believe that what's happening in this movie is possible. So I think Jon Favreau, who directed the film, I think he did a wonderful job with that. He's also gone on to do some wonderful things with the Star Wars universe. He's just a really great showrunner, director, also a fun actor. He's, played, I forget the name of the character. Happy Hogan in this movie and in a lot of the Marvel movies, including a lot of the new Spider-Man movies. So it's just all in all a really well-made movie. And again, a monumental film in the world of comic books. Okay, next up in 2009, my favorite movie of that year is, again, not necessarily the most critically acclaimed film or anything like that, but it's just one that I enjoy a lot, which is the first Star Trek movie. Now, I know a lot of Trekkies do not like this new J.J. Abrams Star Trek trilogy that we've gotten so far. But I really enjoyed this first movie. I had seen a lot of Star Trek as a kid, whether it was the show Next Generation or some of the movies I had watched. I remember watching Nemesis, I think, was it, in theaters? This kind of just modernized and brought to a new generation the world of Star Trek, and it really kind of reinvigorated my love for the whole universe that they have, and I guess multiverse, because this is kind of a multiverse movie. But of course you have Chris Pine, who I think is one of the better Chris's. I think that a lot of people, put him down on the list as far as, Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Chris Pratt. I think Chris Pine is a fantastic actor. I think he can do a lot of different things, and I think he did a great job in this movie. You also have Simon Pegg in this, who's always really funny. Leonard Nimoy is in this movie. Rest in peace, Leonard Nimoy. You have Zachary Quinto, I forget how to pronounce his last name, playing this universe's Spock, who is also wonderful. Zoe Saldana, who is in so many great sci-fi flicks. So it's just a really fun movie, and I know that a lot of the purists may not like it as much, but I enjoyed it, and I think it really kind of reinvigorated my love for Star Trek. All right, we're getting there. We're moving into the 2010s now, and my favorite movie of 2010 is such a fun movie. That is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Now, this is directed by Edgar Wright, who has also gone on to do some wonderful movies. He has such a unique style, and he created something in Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which is, of course, based on actually another comic book when you think about it. It's not like I guess it is kind of a superhero comic book, just not like a Marvel or DC one. And Edgar Wright did such a wonderful job bringing that to life and really taking a lot of the style from the comic book, a lot of the over the top action, and even a lot of the kind of like framing of comic books into this movie. You have Michael Cera, who is great in his role. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is also wonderful as Ramona Flowers. She's gone on to do a bunch of stuff. She was in, oh my God, so many things. 10 Cloverfield Lane is a movie that I really like her in. If you haven't seen that, check that out. And the cast is wild in this flick. You've got Anna Kendrick, Aubrey Plaza, Brandon Routh, who was Superman in Superman Returns. Chris Evans is in this movie. It's insane. Kieran Culkin. It's a wild cast. It's such a fun movie. And again, it's one of those movies that I can just go back and watch over and over again throughout the years. All right, let me get some more water here. Your boy's struggling. We're almost there. We got like 11 left. That doesn't sound like we're almost there. 11 is a lot. Okay, for 2011. Now, here's another one that I'm probably going to get some flack for, but it's just what it is. I love a lot of these movies, and this is the best in this franchise. I think 2011 for me is Fast 5. That's right. The 5th Fast and the Furious movie, the one that introduced The Rock. It's, I think a lot of people agree, the best movie in the series. And I absolutely agree with that. It does. I think this is like it skates the line of having ridiculous over the top action, but not going too far. And that's something that a lot of the Fast and Furious movies have done. They've just gone too far in the most recent films. But here it is just balances along the line of absurdity perfectly. And it's absolutely my second favorite Fast and Furious movie, but I do recognize it as being the best. So there we go for 2011. Next up for 2012, we have another comic book movie. God, this is so bad. But 2012, of course, is the first Avengers movie starring everyone. Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo, Jeremy Renner, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston. It's written and directed by Joss Whedon, who is gone on to be a little bit questionable himself, but the fact of the matter is he did a great job with this movie and with several other movies over the years. And this was really the first time we had seen something as monumental as far as bringing together all of these superheroes that we all love and putting them in a situation on such a grand scale. So it had to be on my list. It had to, for me, it was my most anticipated movie that year. It was undoubtedly one of the most rewatchable movies, or definitely the most rewatchable movie, I think, of that year as well. And it's legendary. How do you not have The Avengers? I mean, unless, of course, you're just going for what is the most critically acclaimed movie of the year. But as far as rewatchability, anticipation, fun, you know, if you want to look at how much money it made, it's an incredible movie, and it definitely deserves to be on my list. Okay, 2013 is a year that I actually, the movie that my God, I can't speak anymore. My favorite movie for 2013 is a movie that I did not watch until relatively recently, and by that I mean just a few years ago. My girlfriend introduced it to me, but this movie is so good, and it's also different than a lot of the ones that have been on my list so far. But this is a movie called About Time. Now, About Time has Domhnall Gleeson in it, Rachel McAdams, Bill Nighy, who I love Bill Nighy. And it's written and directed by Richard Curtis, who also did Love Actually, and a few, Bridget Jones's Diary. I think he wrote that. I don't think he directed it. But it's a story about a young man, Domhnall Gleeson, who, when he turns 21, discovers that he can travel through time. His dad tells him it's a hereditary thing, and basically he then realizes he has this ability, and he uses it to try to like better his life. And it's a fun movie in that regard, but it's also a really emotional and deep family story. And after watching it for the first time, I was just upset that I hadn't seen it earlier, but it is a fantastic film. And looking at the list of movies that came out in 2013, it is without a doubt my favorite of that year. Another movie that was close to being the pick was the third movie in a trilogy called Before Midnight. It's the Richard Linklater trilogy, the Before trilogy. There's Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight, which is a series of movies about a couple's relationship. And although that series of films is, one of my favorites, I couldn't have the third movie in the trilogy be my pick for this year because it relies so much on the prior two. And I think as a standalone film, About Time takes the cake. Okay, for 2014, my pick there, again, we go back into the world of comic books. 2014, it's Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Now, I talked earlier about my love of spy thrillers and, of course, my love of comic book movies. And this is the perfect tie-in for both of those genres. So Captain America, the Winter Soldier takes so much of what I love about those spy thrillers, those 70s spy thrillers. You also have Robert Redford in this movie, who is himself in a lot of those movies back in the 70s. So it does a wonderful job of tying those genres together. It's got a lot of heart in it. The story between Chris Evans' character and Sebastian Stan, the Winter Soldier, and Captain America, their kind of bromance and the tragedy of it is wonderful. It's honestly one of the best individual character comic book movies, right? Especially from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You think about the best Marvel movies and they're generally like the Avengers films. Well, this is a Captain America story and it is absolutely incredible. I think one of the best ones. All right, for 2015, we have Creed, which is a Rocky universe movie. It's the first movie in the Creed trilogy that we've gotten so far. And I've been a Rocky fan my entire life. As a kid, my dad was big into Rocky. I watched every single Rocky movie growing up. And this was kind of the modernization of the Rocky franchise and told from a new perspective, and a perspective that I could relate to in a lot of ways. And I think it was very well done. It's written and directed by Ryan Coogler, who has gone on to become a fantastic director in his own right. And of course, Michael B. Jordan, who's now directing movies. He directed the most recent Creed, but you have him in this film playing the titular character. Tessa Thompson, who is a wonderful actress. It's just a really good, Rocky movie. So you're getting a lot of the sports element of it, the combat and all of that, but you're more than that getting a family story and a broken family story with Adonis Creed and his relationship with his biological father and all of the trauma that comes along with that. So I thought it was a wonderful movie. It definitely tugs at your heartstrings, and the boxing matches are also really well done. I think some of the better choreographed fight scenes in the Rocky franchise. All right, next up, 2016, we've got Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. This is, I think, the best modern Star Wars movie. It's probably the best Star Wars movie since the original trilogy, I think, for me at least. And I think it was so well done. It's directed by Gareth Edwards, who has done also a number of things since then and has proven himself to be a really great director. You've got Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, Alan Tudyk is in this as well. He was in 3:10 to Yuma. He's in this movie. There's a lot of crossover between the actors and actresses in the movies I like. Donnie Yen, who is an awesome actor and martial artist. He plays a blind, force-sensitive monk, basically, in this movie. Ben Mendelsohn, Forrest Whitaker is hilarious. He's kind of ridiculous in this movie, but I love him. But yeah, this tells the story of how Princess Leia got the plans for the Death Star in episode 4. So it's a prequel to episode 4, and it leads right up to the beginning of episode 4. It's really cool. There's a great scene with Darth Vader in this movie. It reminds me a lot of oh my gosh, what's that Akira Kurosawa movie, Seven Samurai. It's kind of like the concept of Seven Samurai in the Star Wars universe, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. All right, next up, 2017, yet another comic book movie, but this one you cannot argue with me on, okay? It's Logan. Logan is an incredible film. It is the third and final Wolverine movie. Hugh Jackman, of course, kind of like completing his arc as this character, and it is so wonderfully done. It's also directed by James Mangold, who did 3:10 to Yuma. Another connection there. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily a fun movie, although there are some fun moments. It is a dark film and another family kind of drama, in fact, with Wolverine and his offspring. I don't want to say his daughter, because I mean, I guess he does kind of treat her as his daughter, but she's technically a clone. But there's just so much to really grasp from this, and it does a great job of feeding off of the prior X-Men movies. You know, a lot of the buildup in those movies is kind of paid off in this one, and emotionally, and I think it's incredibly well done. And honestly, as a standalone comic book movie, one of the best. 2018, my pick for 2018. Now, here is, again, we're sticking in the world of comic books, because the 20-teens had been a wonderful time for the comic book world. And if you were a nerd like me growing up who was big into Marvel and DC and all of that, this is like the most significant payoff was around 2017 to 2019. 2017, of course, we had Logan. 2018, we have Avengers Infinity War. And I'll just say right now, 2019, my pick, Avengers Endgame. That chunk of years right there is what I had been waiting my entire life for, which I know is pathetic, but the fact of the matter is I'm a giant comic book fan and have been since I could read. And these 3 movies back to back to back were the most wonderful 3 years as a comic book fan in the cinema world that I could have ever hoped for. So Avengers Infinity War for 2018, Avengers Endgame for 2019. I know there are some wonderful movies that came out outside of the world of comics and those times, but if we're just looking at my favorite movies, that's what it is. You know, I can accept that other movies are better made, but these are films that I will go back and rewatch for the rest of my life. So how can I not say they're my favorite? Now, the next year, 2020, is a very strange year because not a lot of movies came out, especially not in theaters. And so my pick for that year is a film that came out on Disney Plus that was kind of a film, but kind of not a film. So, but it is what it is. It was definitely my favorite film to watch in 2020, and that is the Disney Plus version of Hamilton. Now, Hamilton, for those of you that don't know, which I'm sure all of you know, is a musical that was on Broadway, and is probably still on Broadway. I don't know. And it is about Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers, and they did a kind of reunion with all of the original cast, the original Broadway cast, and filmed it like a movie / stage play and put it out as a feature film on Disney Plus. And I watched that over and over and over again in 2020. You know, as we were all stuck at home, that was kind of my saving grace in that year. So absolutely the best movie in air quotes that I watched in 2020. My favorite was Hamilton. But again, it was a year where not a lot of things came out. So if you have other movies that you got more enjoyment out of in 2020, definitely let me know. All right, next up on the list, we're almost done. Just a couple more years left. 2021, my pick for that year is going to be Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, again, this is another one of those movies where you get a massive payoff. If you're a comic book fan, if you're a Spider-Man fan, Spider-Man and Wolverine are my two favorite comic book characters of all time. And to go from the 2000s, the early 2000s with Andrew Garfield, oh my God, my brain stopped working. Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. And then, of course, Andrew Garfield in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movies, which weren't that great, to be fair. But then to get all of that culmination in No Way Home and all of the kind of satisfaction from concluding and wrapping up those stories in a really significant way. And also, of course, tying in Tom Holland's run as Spider-Man. The only thing that could have made this movie better, in my opinion, is if they somehow worked in Miles Morales. That was the one thing that I was like, if they can find a way to tie in Miles Morales, maybe even because they're doing multiverse stuff, maybe they bring the animated version of Miles Morales into the real world and he becomes a real human actor. And that kind of becomes the spinoff of, that version of Spider-Man in live action film. I thought that would have been incredible, but we can't get everything. But even without that, this is absolutely my favorite movie from that year and was such a satisfying payoff for the literal decades of Spider-Man films that I had enjoyed up until that point. All right, and last up, 2022. Again, we're not going to do a 2023 pick because we're only halfway through the year, so we'll have to wait until next year for that pick. But my favorite movie of 2022 is also a movie that won a ton of awards, and that is Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is a movie that I saw in theaters, and afterwards, I could not stop talking about it. I was buzzing after seeing this movie, and it was so flawlessly done. Of course, action sequences are incredible. The visual effects are amazing, but at its core, just a story. Again, I'm a sucker for family stories. The story of a mother and her daughter, and also, husband and father there as well. Ke Huy Quan did a wonderful job. He was so cool in this movie. So many different scenes with him, getting to play different versions of his character. But it was so well done. The family story there is so powerful, and I absolutely loved it. Everything Everywhere All at Once, without a doubt, the best movie of 2022. Deserves all of the awards that it won, and I am definitely looking forward to whatever the Daniels do next. So for those who don't know, the Daniels are the people that directed the movie. There's Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, who prior to this had worked in music videos. They did the music video for Turn Down for What, which I remember when they announced that they would be directing this film, I was like, okay, maybe it'll be all right. I did not expect it to be as incredible as it was, and for their talent to transfer over to feature films as well as it did. So my pick for 2022, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And those are all of my favorite movies for every year leading up to this year. Now, of course, there are other movies that I loved in each of these years, right? But these are, if I had to pick one from each year, that's what it is. And that's going to bring this incredibly long live stream to a close. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it. Of course, this is a celebration of hitting 1,000 subscribers. So I could not have done this without each and every one of you, because that's how math works. All right. So thank you guys again for watching, for subscribing. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like on it. I'm going to edit at the actual ranking itself into its own separate video. So be on the lookout for that as well. And that's going to be it for me. Thanks for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next one. All right. Be good.